This is Michael David Cobb Bowen, and today is the day after Easter, and I am celebrating. I had a really good weekend, um, but I'm still a little scruffy, and I always, when I come back and look at these, I never like seeing myself with the mad scientist hair. So I had to get over to the barber, maybe today or tomorrow. But today I want to do something of a Tales from the Yellow Truck, which I haven't done in quite some time. And it's about how I'm doing in my life. And I'm doing okay. I should be doing well, I should be doing good, but I'm not. And that's because I am, as they say, running out of runway, which means I'm living on credit and on savings. And it's getting to the point where I'm going to have to make some hard choices. Um, and what I'm thinking about is a review of my peasant theory and where I'm at with that. And so the peasant theory is something I started thinking about 10, 15 years ago when I wanted to get out of talking politics the way people talk about politics. We went from a generally more principled politics to a generally more populist politics over the past 30 years. And more so, I'm looking at what the changes are in this economy and how that's affecting me and how it's affecting a lot of people. Um, so some of it is, a one person demonstration, that's one data point, which is me. But there's things that I see as well. So I'm a data engineer and I'm unemployed and I am working right now with uh, several AIs. I have a choice of them. I've changed the way that I code. I've changed the way that I think because now I get to think like a boss because I have all these little AIs doing work for me that ordinarily I would do. And ordinarily, kind of, I would not do them because I would think it's a waste of my time. But that's in the context of working in an organization that is optimizing my skills and my time. And I've always been an organization team player, which means I develop the skills that most benefit the organization. And when I'm on my own, I develop whatever skills I feel like. I indulge my curiosity and I learn what I feel like learning. And then I'll master those things. But I've never had so much time to master a bunch of skills that may or may not be useful. Because, like thousands of other people, I am in this whirlpool of basically HR has gone to pot. It's a horrible place to be because you never get any feedback, and everybody's being politically nice, which means you get no constructive feedback because nobody is incented to do that. When a job, and I've seen it on LinkedIn, of course, a place that I don't really like to be. A job is posted in LinkedIn, and within a couple hours, there are 400, 700, I've seen it up to 5,700 applications for one job. And that's nothing for human beings to be doing. So that has been passed off to AIs. And there are a number of ways that you can do this because um, for a combination of reasons, in my industry in particular, uh, front offices are trimmed down and they don't so much exist. So you have a resume that I, for example, have said, look at what I've done over the past 25 years and build me a resume. Okay? So that is what the AI thinks I should be presented as. and then I have to go through it and I compare that with my manual resume that I've been doing, and then that goes out to a recruiter, because recruiters search on job boards. So you can go to a job board like Indeed, Glassdoor, Monster, Dice, The Ladders, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the primary ones that I look at, and also Robert Half. And you can do it that way, or you can go through a bunch of different companies, go directly to the companies. And the companies have used some SaaS product. And I mean, E&Y does it, Deloitte does it, just all the major national corporations use the same thing. And I can't remember the name of it, but I know when I save my passwords to those, I have to make a specific thing that says Deloitte or E&Y or Oracle or something like that. And but it's the same service. You upload your resume, it sort of transcribes it over into a form, and then you submit your form. And I have literally submitted hundreds and hundreds of applications over the past year. Number one, because you have to do it and mark that you've done it for your unemployment, and even after unemployment runs out. You know, I'll do several, 7, 8 a week. But now I have increased that volume because I've signed into another kind of service, and this one's called Apply Me, and you pay $100 for 90 days, and they'll do the same thing. They'll stick their AIs on your resume, and then send out resumes, 6, 7 per day. And for that volume, there's a problem on the other hand, which is you as a person who is applying to these places. You're not going to hear anything back from them for 2 weeks at the earliest, as their bots handle what your bot has sent. And it's all very impersonal. And even when there are people involved, and most of the headhunters in the IT industry are Indian, which there'd be nothing wrong with that, except for some of them have good English and some of them don't. A lot of them have phone numbers that come out of New Jersey, but they are not obviously in New Jersey, because you'll find that they're calling you 4 o'clock on a Saturday or Sunday, because they're in a different time zone altogether. And, I would like to work in a local job. I live in Los Angeles, one of the biggest metros in the world. Well, in the U.S. for sure. And they don't know the geography. They don't know if I'm close to Alameda, California, or San Diego, California. It's just a California job as far as they know. And you get that kind of problem. So that adds a complication, because as a headhunter, you get a fraction of my salary if you place me correctly. So there's your incentive. And if you hear a no, well, then you got to go on to the next guy. So it's a volume game rather than a quality game. And a quality game would be easier if you could pick and choose. But the picking and choosing has nothing to do with your capabilities. It's just a lottery system for jobs. And then when your lottery ticket comes in, then it is an audition. And this is, I've been fortunate because in my entire career, I've never had to go the audition route. I've always had, such a good record that somebody from the company who's left earlier to go to another company says, hey, you ought to come over here. This is really good. And that has been the case for me going back to the mid-90s. And it's always been that way. I've always known somebody who has moved on or moved up, and then they call me back and say, hey, you ought to try this. And then I've run out of that. So uh, that's unfortunate, but that's just my case. The problem, of course, is how the economy is going. So, how is it that this particular way of doing business has come to dominate the way we do this, the way we do things? And let's talk about it from a super broad perspective because that's just a very narrow perspective. So, as I said, I started with my peasant theory in, let's say, 2015. I don't know what year it was. I can have an AI look that up for me. The bottom line is, I said, how do we make sense of the very broad middle class? Because in America, you're said that you're in the middle class, but that's very broad. You could be blue collar in the middle class. You could be out of work in the middle class. You could be white collar in the middle class. You could be middle management in the middle class. You could be a registered nurse in the middle class. You could be a baggage handler at the airport in the middle class. So, how do you get work and how do you find your place in the economy? Well, I thought of it in terms of function. And I said, functionally, there's basically three classes of Americans. And no matter how you play your demographics or your psychographics, or your buying patterns or your marketing or merchandising, you basically fall into these three functional categories. And at the top, of course, are the elites. And the elites is the ruling class. And what enables the elites are the geniuses, the genius class. And these are the smartest people that we have. And then everybody else is in a broad peasant class. And that's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing because we don't have a serf class or a slave class. We're not doing indentured servitude. I know that there are people trafficked, and there's a lot of sex trafficking, and there's a lot of migrant trafficking that goes on in the United States. But by and large, I'm not looking at the most abused people. I'm looking at the prospects for the middle class. Because the middle class, and that's 85% of us, determine how society works. Because we are the majority. But there are certain things that you can do in the middle class that you can't do. Well, let's put it this way. There are certain things that you can do in the peasant class, but there are certain things that you can't do. You can't instantly be a genius. We have a meritocracy, by and large. I think it's being eroded, but we still have it. And we still have people's ambitions to look towards merit. And we've done horrible things to sidetrack merit. And I think that is the case for the most part. The geniuses certainly notice it. And it's because we have bad elites. And I think it's because our elites have become complacent. And they've become complacent because they figured out how to game democracy. And you can game democracy when you are postmodern. All right. So now I'm throwing out some heavy terms, and but it's truly what I see. It's truly what I believe. It's truly something I'm willing to have challenged at any level, at any time. But I see a lot of concurrence among the genius class, which I would call myself in the genius class if I were working for an elite, but I'm not. But I've come close enough to working for the elites so that I have an idea, certainly what other genius folks have witnessed. And what I want to say bemoan, but what I hope doesn't happen is that the genius class gets eroded to the point at which they become defensive of their lives and of the merit that they get because there aren't emergent elites who are willing to take the risks that are necessary to serve the public interest. And serving the public interest, you can have a variety of opinions on that, but I think it should be obvious that serving the public interest is meaning doing right by the 85%, which is most of us, the peasant class. And so what am I actually meaning by this? I mean by this, for example, the degradation of, well, let's just call it participation trophies. When you have helicopter parenting by elites or by geniuses, such that there are inside games that get promotions and that get attention, and that get elite attention, then the elites can satisfy themselves that they're doing the best that can be done, and that they can speak with disrespect or even contempt for the average American whom they believe to be stupid. And I think you can get to that point as being a complacent elite, bordering on dangerous, not dangerous, counterproductive, easily counterproductive, when you have populist politics. That is to say, you can take a New York Times poll or a Wall Street Journal poll or a Washington Post poll and say most people in America feel like this. And you can make those statistics work the way you like, because we know the media spins things the way that they like. And so they can say this is the most important thing. And I look at an organization like a CIA or the National Security Council as a population of geniuses who should have it in their best interest to tell the absolute truth as close as they can with all of their efforts, and to abuse the term speaking truth to power. And power doesn't necessarily have to respect that. Power can just do what power wants to do. That's what it is like to be an elite in the ruling class. You do what you like to do. And you don't have to follow the rules. It's your job to make the rules. So when you're making the rules and you are not necessarily accountable to the truth that the genius class will tell you, and you have a decision matrix and you just decide, well, this is the fact that I want to pay attention to, and disregard the other facts, and to hell with the consequences as long as I'm polling well, then you have, the beginnings of the corruption of the elite. And then you have the beginnings of a defensive genius class that says, I have to do this to keep my job, to keep my status in society, to keep my credentials alive. I don't want to get canceled. And the elites, the ruling class, doesn't necessarily worry about being canceled. Now, I'm not saying this to be idealistic. I think every system gets corrupted. That's something you know when you're an engineer like I am. And your job is to make it stand up under the most durable conditions that you can dream up. And there's always a triad of trade-offs: good, fast, or cheap. And you want it to be good above all, because that's your reputation for mastery of the skills that you do, whether you're a peasant or a genius. Because there's overlap, let me say that, between the mastery of the peasant class and the mastery of the genius class. I'm not necessarily saying that they're better people or they're actually more skilled. They're just the ones that are working directly for the most powerful people, the people who can write blank checks, the people who can say, it is my will that this shall be done. Here's your blank check. Make it so. And it's not always a blank check. I say that metaphorically. But these are people who know what can be done, and then they can hire the people to make sure that it gets done. And we're very creative as Americans. We figure things out, and we try a lot of things. But we've also been able to monetize a lot of things that don't necessarily make sense for the good of the public. And that has to do with what has, it's an explanation of what has transpired in society over the past 20 or 30 years, such that intelligent people have to worry about currying favor because the system is inefficient and it goes against the value of telling the truth. It goes against the value of putting in maximum effort. It goes against the idea of mastery in broad strokes, because you don't get paid to think. And if you feel like when you're thinking and you're doing the hard work and you're trying to achieve not perfection but excellence, and you know that this is going to cause you trouble if you raise those points, this is the crisis of the genius class. This is the crisis of the upper middle class. This is the crisis in America where people feel like they can't speak the truth, where they can't be honest. But it goes beyond that. It goes to what institutional things are put up because you don't expect people to tell the truth. Which is to say, if you expect the average man to be a sexual predator, if you believe in this thing called toxic masculinity, and you're saying, well, maybe only 1 out of 10 is, a rapist or a racist, well, then that means that 9 out of 10 of us, 10 out of 10 of us have to pass the barrier, which is an insult to our intelligence. It's an insult to our civility. It's an insult to our integrity. It's like, what do you think I am? And so those are the kinds of barriers that are put up because we're exposed to the most extreme evil things that anyone might do. And that gets out into society wherever you are. It's like, I think what has happened, and you can see this for yourself, that there's X porn. That is to say, it could be hat porn, it could be watch porn, it could be anything porn, because we exploit things to an extreme level, and that's something that gets monetized. And so since there's everything porn that is exploited and monetized in America, you have to say, okay, well, I have to have these porn screens because the average person is exposed to this porn. And this has devastating psychological consequences to all of us because society just accepts that the porn is out there. So we might as well make sure that we have guardrails up against porn, which makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to assume that everybody is at that basic level. Okay? So we insult everybody with self-discipline, with morals, with ethics, and we invert it because we say, well, only indigenous peoples have this. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you can see how our ability to monetize the extremities of things that happen in society, that narrows things and the chances for the middle, because we screen out everything. And if there's, well, let me put it to you this way. There's a difference between Bart Simpson and Cartman. And both of them have been on the air for probably 30 years. So the question is, who is the average American kid more like? Cartman or Bart Simpson? Or Lisa Simpson? Or Kenny? right? And that's how pervasive the bad ideas are in society, and that's how it happens at institutions, which ought to be expecting good things from people, um, have to guard against pollution and corruption. And it's now that the corruption is accepted, and that's how people discuss politics. They're like, what's the conspiracy behind this? What is the evil genius behind this? And we've come so that our elites are either James Bond or a Bond villain. And that's kind of what we expect. That's how people talk about billionaires, that they're ultimately a Bond villain and they're running a scam against all of us. And it's hard to take when you have grown up in a society that wasn't so cynical, and where people were expected to do not heroics, but good efforts, and good job was well rewarded. But now we've taken for granted that everybody is basic, and that all we deserve is basic. And the other side of this coin is when you accept that everybody is basic, then your heart goes out naturally to help such people, and you come up with ideas to do that. And that's in another elite that doesn't do well for the 85% of us, because when they assume that, let's say, 30% of us are always going to be discriminated against, will always need help to get through society, will always need subsidies in order to be economically viable, then you get these cutouts and double standards, where you just say, hey, look, the elites are so corrupt that there's no way that you could possibly make it on your own as an American, because they're going to cut you out. And people assume this for themselves, and it's a horrible thing. Again, it accelerates the corruption that it thinks it's trying to fight. So that's kind of how I see the problems in America when I break it down. And there's a point at which people get so cynical that they want to hide themselves away, and they want to kind of assume that everything's a scam, and you're going to have to figure out a way to beat the system rather or exploit flaws in the system rather than honestly work with the system, because maybe the system doesn't honestly work with you. And I certainly see this in terms of being an engineer who wants to solve problems. And I look at the world and I say, oh, there's a problem, we could make that better. Oh, here's something that we could fix. And when you have that kind of attitude and you personally see that you're cut out, it's very disappointing. It's very disheartening. And you can see the kind of disrespect that people get will never give anybody the time to sit back and study. And especially if you don't have a track record or the discipline of doing that, or you don't see evidence to the fact that it makes sense to be a good mom. It makes sense to be a good dad. It makes sense to be a good kid. It makes sense to be a good employee. It makes sense to be a good boss. All right. We don't need the porn. We don't need to see people on Love Island or some baking show be examples of the extreme things. That's not what people need to eat. It's good enough to have a good ice cream cone, all right, rather than a triple fondant, you know, the extremes that they go to. And the same thing is with a good automobile. You don't need to have a Rolls-Royce electric vehicle that doesn't pollute and that shines your shoes when you put your feet in the well, or it's pushing luxury to average people and selling it like, well, this is the extreme, rather than it being transportation. There's a lot of ways to see that we need a lot of help for the common man in this society. And we have to start by getting rid of double standards, by being able to punish what's bad. Uh, it just sounds rather redundant for me to think about free speech and self-defense and just integrity in general. And I feel like if we don't do that, then we will become more militarized as a society, because everybody will become defensive and everybody will have to prove everything, rather than there being a general assumption that Americans are good people, and have ways of socializing that are not mediated through gatekeeping, just simple discrimination, simple ethics, um, and I would say common sense. But I understand that when you can monetize extremes and outliers, then you can make dog's breakfast out of common sense. And I think we've given a lot of market space to young people in ways that are good, but in ways that are isolating and pampering. We are now even primed to say, well, Gen Z will do, and that's supposed to mean something. And you can do that when you're an elite. And again, that goes to the idea of complacency. When you feel like you don't have to reach out to the common man, that you can invent new language anytime just for your own in group. But here's, I guess, what I finally want to say. And it's the biggest, not hot take, but you can tell that I've thought about this. I'm very worried that we are creating a managerial class in our business that don't really know how to deal with people well. And the simplest way of saying it is me saying it as a big brother who grew up in a family with 5 kids, me being the oldest. And I heard my father say, when I'm not here, you're the man of the house. And I've heard tell, I should say, of psychological studies that say that the kids that do the best are kids in like parochial schools, where when you get to the 4th grade, you can be a coach, as it were, to the kindergartners and the 1st graders. So they make the distinction between big kids and little kids. And when you have 8th graders in the same school, then you can take care of the 4th graders. And I don't know that schools do that so much any longer. And I don't know that families have enough kids for parents to do that with their own children. I know I was changing diapers when I was a teenager, and I was fixing formula, and I was know how to make stuff, because I had sibs in my family that were 8, 9, 10 years younger than me. And so if we're going to have very small families, and we're going to have pervasive social media, and we're going to have a channel for every one of us that's monetized down the long tail of our demographic, and then we'll say every generation can work with new values, we're setting ourselves up to be decimated by AI, because AI will be a serf economy, and it will please us in a populist way. And we will lack the people skills and the social skills to do those things by ourselves. And I don't mean to indict anyone, but I think if you met your partner on social media, are you going to stay married? Are you even going to care about marriage? Or are you one of those millions of people who just say, I don't know if I'd want to bring children into this world? So in that way, you're kind of anti-humanity, because we have a society that monetizes the extremes, that doesn't assume that we have common decency, and doesn't necessarily reward working hard in a meritocracy of truth and discovery and humility. That doesn't even emphasize virtues. We'll talk about your skin color, or how do you like to get your rocks off sexually. And I think it's just something I'm sensitive to, obviously, but I do it in my self-interest, because I want to work in a society that works, that doesn't assume corruption, but can find it and diminish it. That doesn't assume that you're some kind of pervert, and doesn't make more space for people who are psychologically damaged to be treated as equals socially. We can't have, and I know it's a catchphrase, suicidal empathy, because that's the other side. When you just say, well, 30-40% of America is not going to get through unless we have special standards for them, because we assume that the elites are so corrupt that 30% of our society will fail without intervention. Because then you're working on this basis that says the people don't know what's good for them, and I have to build it for them, and you destroy the agency of those people. These are arguments that you wouldn't expect a software engineer or data engineer or a business intelligence data warehouse cloud kind of guy like I am to have. And it would stroke my ego to say, well, it's because I've been underemployed my entire life. But I've done very well up until this point, because, as I said, I've had a hand up by people I trust. And now I'm at the cattle call. I'm in the commodities market, and I'm trying to learn new stuff. I'm doing awesome stuff with AI, and I think it's as big as the invention of the cloud, because I'm not locked in. There are things that I can do on my own, and it's wonderful. But I don't want to work for a company where everything is captured, and everybody knows it's annoying, and they're only going for the dosh point, or the point that we're all just surviving because they don't pay us to think. We just have to do what the boss says. And that's the feeling I get. It's the feeling I get not just in my industry, but in society. And I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I don't think you can hide the truth from a country this large. But you can do power moves, and you can coerce the genius class so that the rest of us have little choice, because we have oligarchs, real oligarchs. And there's some things that you want an oligarchy, but I don't want to get into that either. Bottom line, I think everybody wants a society that's a little bit more fair, that's a little bit more trustworthy, and a little bit more trusting of us. And that will take the time to listen to somebody talk for an hour, somebody who's nobody, right? Just to say, hey, this is common sense. Hey, this is how everybody should be treated. Hey, I'm not afraid of that direction or up or down, because I know how to treat people fairly, and I expect other people will want to treat people fairly. And I have proven it in my own life as a father, as a brother, as a husband, as a cousin, as an employee, as a boss, as an applicant, as all these things, because it's consistent through wherever you go in life. You have to prove yourself trustworthy. You have to have common decency. You have to know how to deal with people, look them in the eye. But here I am sitting in my home office looking a camera in the eye. But that's how fragmented we've become. Wish I could walk like I used to. I can't say. I can't have the 70s back where I read the classified ads and get on the bus and meet the hiring manager where they work and say, sir, I'd like to have a job. Ma'am, I'd like to apply for work here. And yeah, miss that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. And you guys take care. Thanks for listening. And I'm sure there's going to be a transcript of this in case you read faster than you watch, which most of us used to do. Take care.